But let's go back first to what I want to call, and you probably have in other philosophy courses have already heard of, the problem of other minds. How many have come across the problem of other minds? Okay, well, Heidegger has a strong view about the problem of other minds. Not an answer, but a kind of outrage that people treat it as a problem. He has the same kind of outrage about the problem of the external world. How many have come across the problem of the external world? Okay, well, naturally. That's really why I wanted you to take 25B, because you have to understand what he's against. You understand a philosopher, I think, always by having to understand what it is that they're against. What, if they're right, must turn out to be wrong. And that's what we have to talk about. And I mentioned last time, and I reread it, and it's still so neat that I thought I would just bring it and read it. You're here where there are problems of other minds, problems of external world. You're also, you don't know it as much yet because you're undergraduates mostly and not graduate students, but this is a whole industry of sort of normal philosophy, knows what the normal problems are, and people write PhDs to answer them or to propose how to help with them. And Heidegger thinks this is all outrageous. And what we should have, he says, this is a when is this? 1920. No, there are so many different times. Well, it's about as 1925. Anyway, he's sort of running up to writing Being in Time, and he's giving this course, and he starts out saying that he's going to ask questions, not have problems. He says, putting forth questions. Questions are not happenstance thoughts, nor are questions common problems of today, which one picks up from hearsay and book learning and decks out with a gesture of profundity. Questions grow out of confrontation with the subject matter. That for him always means the phenomena. And the subject matter is there only where eyes are. It is in this manner that a number of questions will have to be posed, in this course, and all the more so considering that questions have today fallen out of fashion in the great industry of problems. One stands up for nothing more than the trouble-free running of the industry, sort of normal science, normal philosophy. Having become ripe for the organization of that, philosophy interprets its corruption, that is, turning everything into problems, as, quote, the resurrection of metaphysics. What's funny, really, is that Heidegger's complaining about the epistemology, which has the problem of mostly of the external world, but also of other minds. And he's complaining also that the solution is to flip over and do metaphysics. And that's, ever since I've been around, that's been going on. It's just, when I was a graduate student, everybody was doing epistemology. That was the question. It was a required course, absolutely required of every major. And then after a long time of getting nowhere, they decided, no, the problem isn't how we know everything. It's a problem about what things are. We should be doing metaphysics. So, I don't know, maybe 15 years or 20 ago, people flipped over. We don't have epistemology as a requirement anymore. It's only an option. And metaphysics got to be in charge. And now, as far as when my colleagues talk about what we need to hire somebody in, they always say, well, we need more people in M&E. M&E is metaphysics and epistemology. Right now, the only difference is, it seems right now, instead of flipping back and forth as if you surely knew which one you wanted was the right thing the philosophy industry should be doing, the philosophy industry is a little confused as to which it should be doing, so it goes back and forth. So it covers both. Okay, a little more from this book, The Hermeneutics of Facticity, because he's so clear and upfront here. This should be sort of hanging over us as we read it. I may have read this before, but I don't think so. There's a section in his course called Misunderstandings, and the first thing in that section is called the subject-object schema. He says this schema must be avoided. And then this is the schema that must be avoided, and it's about 10 sentences long. It'll sound very familiar to you. It's the schema that produces the problems. Here it is. Here's the schema. What exists are subjects and objects, consciousness and being. Being is the object of consciousness. Being in the authentic sense is the being of nature. That would be what science tells us. Consciousness is an I think, an ego pole, a center of acts, and the consciousness has standing opposite beings, objects, natural things, things of value, goods meaning more kinds of value, I think. And then the relation between subject and object needs to be explained. It is a problem for epistemology. That's all amazing. I'm going to read you two more things. I mean, it would be more striking to you. The more you hang around in philosophy, the more this will strike you as absolutely amazing. So I'm now on 63 of the hermeneutics of facticity. No modification of this schema, that is the subject-object schema, would be able to do away with its inappropriateness. The schema itself has developed historically within a tradition from different constructions of each of its components, subject and object, which proceeded in isolation from one another and were then integrated in various ways. The dominance of this epistemological problem, that is how your subjects get to know the external world or get to know other subjects, is characteristic of a widely observed kind of activity through which academic disciplines, especially philosophy, gain a foothold in life and preserve themselves. 90% of the literature is preoccupied with ensuring that such wrong-headed problems do not disappear and are confounded in still more and in ever new ways. Such literature dominates the philosophy industry. Well, that is pretty devastating and in many ways right on, I think. But and now that was just an introduction to going into the problem of other minds. The problem of the external world doesn't really come up fully until the reality chapter, where he actually has a section on epistemology and the reality of the external world. But now we do get the problem of other minds, and he enters it always as a question, not a problem, and he wants to know what is the way of being of others. Well, he wants the ontology of being with. And so on 156, you should all have read this already for the end of last week, but we still haven't done it. So on 156, he's talking about this, and he's distinguishing, and I just have to tell you because it's sort of murky, and I didn't notice it for years. There's a big deal being made between with the distinction between Dasein with and being with. Dasein with is, I think, an existential, factical situation in which there are various Daseins, and any Dasein is with other Daseins. That's Dasein with. Being with is an existential structure that every particular Dasein has in its very way of being, and it has it whether any other particular Daseins are around with it or not. I mean, there may be no Daseins with Robinson Crusoe, but he's still got being with. Partly you can understand that by thinking that he sort of, it strikes me as interesting and strange, and I once said it to John Searle, and then he thought it was interesting and strange, that when we see anything, we always see it as what anybody could see. The idea that it somehow, in our private experience, just is not the way things look. They look public. Merleau-Ponty is on to that. And Heidegger, Dasein with doesn't capture that, because that says, well, whenever you see something, you think somebody else is seeing it or could be seeing it. No, it's more basic than that. It's just that somehow there is this very fundamental ontological characteristic of whatever it is we encounter, unless there's some special, wonderful, peculiar breakdown, like after images or something. Whatever we encounter it as in a public world, and for everybody. So he's getting from Dasein with to being with at the bottom of 156, and he starts out talking about Dasein with. he says in the third line of the bottom paragraph, we use the term Dasein with to designate that being, and then he got the four whiches wrong there, that being by virtue of which the others who are freed within the others are freed within the world. That's just it's a funny way to put it, but I mean that means that if you're around, and there are other people around, then there's Dasein with between the people around. Thus, this Dasein with of others is disclosed within the world for a Dasein, and so too for those who are Daseins with us. Only because, and now he's switching from existential and factical, I think, to existential and a basic structure of Dasein's being, that we only have Dasein with because Dasein is in itself essentially being with. This phenomenological assertion that Dasein is essentially being with has an existential ontological meaning. It doesn't seek to establish ontically that factically I am not present at hand alone, and there are others of my kind around. At the bottom of that page, being with is an existential characteristic of Dasein even when factically no other is present at hand or perceived. And that's just this idea that our experience is just through and through public, shareable experience, whether we're the only human being left or we were somehow dropped in here by helicopter with no other human beings around. We'd still have Dasein with, I think, for Heidegger. Okay, and yet he says, and now you should be careful. Why is this sentence something troubling? The beginning of that paragraph, which I sort of parachuted into the middle of. The beginning of that paragraph, the expression Dasein, however, shows plainly that in the first instance this entity is unrelated to others, and that of course it can still be with others afterward. Does that bother you? And how? It just says exactly the opposite of what I've been saying for the last 5 minutes. Well, that's another one of those rare moments of Heidegger. It's not irony, I think. It's like Wittgenstein, Interlocutor, where the normal Cartesian philosopher comes in and says, but surely, and now let me help with the translation. You wouldn't fall for it if the translator hadn't muffed it, or sorry, because it says, I forget the German right now, but I wrote in the expression Dasein surely shows plainly. What's the German? Oh, sorry, I never told you. On 120 in the German, in the very first sentence of the second paragraph on 120. The expression Dasein, what? Surely shows, I think. What's the German for surely? What? Doch deutlich. Okay. I would translate that surely, not however. I mean, it's supposed to be. It's supposed to give away that the person saying this thing has got some assumption about what's obvious. I mean, however could do that too, but I think if you write in surely, you can feel better what Heidegger's trying to say. The expression Dasein surely shows plainly. The plainly is the same thing. That in the first instance, Dasein and so forth and so forth. Well, that's wrong. Because it goes on, yet one must not fail to notice, and then he goes to Dasein with, and from Dasein with he goes to being with, and that just takes back that first sentence. But whenever you find a sentence and you're reading along carefully, and it seems to be outrageously wrong-headed, you either have to come and ask me or your TAs what happened, or you have to consider that maybe it's the stupid interlocutor who's coming in and disagreeing and just getting sort of kicked out of the discussion at that point. Okay, so Dasein then is, remember, and it's important, Dasein isn't just an organism with limbs that move. Dasein isn't even a perceiver with visual experiences as far as Heidegger is concerned. He's not denying that we are organisms with limbs that move, you and me, and that we are perceivers. But as he puts it sometime, and I put it sometime, the Dasein in us isn't an organism with arms and legs, and the Dasein isn't in us, isn't a perceiver with inner visual experiences. Dasein, well, what is Dasein? What is the Dasein in us? It's that we take a stand on our own being, and we have to do that, and we have to do that by using the public world. That's gets him back to where he wants to be. There's a paragraph which says that in a kind of mysterious way, but it's interesting. If you know, I'm trying to not talk much about Kierkegaard. How many people here have had any Kierkegaard? Probably people from Philosophy 7. Okay. Well, he's thinking about Kierkegaard, and he's relating his view to Kierkegaard's, and I can't tell whether he's sort of cheating and trying to make himself different from Kierkegaard, or he's trying to show that he got his view of Dasein from Kierkegaard. Because those of you who had Kierkegaard in Philosophy 7 know that Kierkegaard defines us, human self, as a being that relates itself to itself, quote unquote. Sounds pretty familiar, doesn't it? So, and that's at stake in this paragraph. Heidegger says, but if the self is conceived only as a way of being of this entity, that's the interlocutor again. If the self is conceived only, that's as a way of being of this entity, that seems tantamount to volatilizing the real core of Dasein. Why is that the interlocutor? Well, the interlocutor says, but the self is a subject, surely. It's got some kind of self-sufficiency. It's got some kind of content. You're not going to tell me that Dasein is simply a way of acting. It's a stream of comportment. So Heidegger has to answer that. He says, any apprehensiveness, however, which one may have about this, gets its this meaning that there's no substance there, gets its nourishment from the perverse assumption that the entity in question has at bottom the kind of being which belongs to something present at hand, even if one is far from attributing to it the solidity of a current corporeal thing. So sometimes people say, in Heidegger's time particularly, well, we certainly aren't making the Cartesian mistake. We don't think that we are things, but of course, being a thing doesn't mean being a physical thing. It means being a self-sufficient substance. And so when Descartes says that we're res cogitans, or John Searle says we are minds, then they're saying that we are a present at hand, self-sufficient something. And then he says, yet, and this is his view, man's substance is not spirit as synthesis of soul and body. It is rather existence. Well, remember those for Philosophy 7, when Kierkegaard talks about the self, he says the self is a synthesis of soul and body, and then he says, but then it's not yet a self, because it isn't a self until it takes a stand on itself. It has to relate itself to itself. It's not enough just to be a synthesis. For Plato, the self was a synthesis. You stuck a soul with a body. For Descartes, it wasn't even a synthesis. It was really just a combination for Plato and a combination for Descartes. It's stronger to say it's a synthesis, but it's not strong enough because we don't know what that means. But what it means is that you can't get rid of either the bodily side or the mind side, but that they are together in something more fundamental, namely the stand that inseparable something or other takes on being that kind of inseparable something or other. I'm talking in weird abstract terms because if I talk Kierkegaard, I will for a second, it's the finite and infinite. The self has got finite and infinite, it's got temporal and eternal, it's got necessity and freedom, and those are the combination. And then it has to take a stand on itself. So Heidegger what do you think he's doing there? You think he's saying, I'm not making the mistake Kierkegaard made of saying that spirit is a synthesis of soul and body? Or is he saying, I agree with Kierkegaard that it's not a synthesis of soul and body, it's more? What? Oh, didn't I tell us where we were? I'm sorry, I'm not doing very well. You got to remind me of that. I'm on 153 at the end. No, sorry about that. I had that. So But somebody should stop me. Thanks, Dave. I mean, it's why do you let me go on and on about a paragraph that you can't find because it's not in your reading for the week? Okay, at the top of 153, it's that top paragraph. In German, it's 117. It's the last paragraph of section 25. And I really can't tell, and I don't think anybody can, but the German's not going to help there, I don't think, whether he is claiming something on his own or not. I hope he knows that it's Kierkegaard. After all, Kierkegaard knew that it was existence. Kierkegaard said he was the first existential thinker. But anyway, whichever way you want to do it, Heidegger is certainly saying we're not substances, and so we've got to go and look at our way of being, and then the whole problem of other minds is going to disappear. He's not going to solve the problem of other minds in the external world. That's this sort of fake activity, or he thinks hopeless activity that's going on. He's going to dissolve the problem of other minds by saying, well, we're not a self-contained substance, and I'm not, and you're not, and I don't have the problem of how I know what's going on inside of your private, sort of talk like Wittgenstein, you've got a beetle in a box and you can see it, that's your private experience, and I've got my private experience, and how in the world do I know from anything in my private experience what's going on in yours, or whether you have any. You want to say something, David? Yeah, what do you think?
I think he's making this kind of artificial distinction between himself and Kierkegaard. Yes, Kierkegaard says it. So it's a synthesis that is posited by spirit.
Oh, wait, let's not talk about it now. I disagree already. It's not posited by spirit. The synthesis, never mind. We'll talk later. Okay. About the self passage. So the argument is now, roughly, Heidegger's going to say that being with is an existential structure of Dasein. And why? Why did I go back to, without telling you, to the top of 153? Because if the way of being of Dasein is existence, and existence, remember, means that its being is an issue for it, and its only way of making its being an issue for it is by what it does, then it follows that it's got this publicness built right into it from the ground up. It needs social roles, like being a teacher, or being a student, or being a father, or whatever, and it needs equipment for doing those roles in order to to be what it is, namely existing, self, taking a stand on itself. And now that's got to be in the background of your thinking when we get now to the problem of other minds. In a way, you can see already he's going to just dodge it, dissolve it, or something, because he's redefined you not as a mind, but as what you you're this being taking a stand on its being. So then he says, so there's no problem about how I know the content, the private content of other minds. And he considers what was a big deal in his day, a proposal that we do it by empathy. And then he's talking about that on 161 and 162. Empathy is supposed to be how, in my private experience, I can get an intuition of your private experience. I mean, I'm sure sometimes that happens, that somebody's feeling so anxious and upset, and you you have empathy, and that means you get a feeling of being anxious and upset. There are all kinds of problems with that. How would you know that was there? Then you get an epistemological problem. How do you know that that's that you got the right answer there about what they've got, and so forth. So he's not going to buy the empathy story, and the bottom line is going to be, I don't want to spend the time on empathy, I decided. So the real answer to empathy, the answer to all of these, is what I just said, and I think we just go to that on 155. I mean, the crucial move is that what I was just saying, Dasein has to be in the world with others to be Dasein. This is in the middle of 155, 119 in the German. The bottom of that big paragraph about 6 lines from the bottom of that big paragraph on the right, and not at the beginning of a sentence. That's why I'm telling you all this. I'm beginning at the end of a sentence, or sort of halfway through. Even one's own Dasein becomes something that it can itself proximally come across only when it looks away from experiences. Which word for experiences is that? You remember? That's Erlebnis. That's the private experiences word. And this is, he's just giving you again a disagreeing with all the Cartesians. Only when it looks away from its inner experiences and the center of its acts. Cross out actions, because actions are public bodily things, and acts are private mental things. It's a crucial distinction for Husserl, for instance, that the translator just doesn't seem to know about. So he says, even one's own Dasein becomes something that it can proximally come across only when it looks away from experiences and the center of its acts, or does not yet see them at all. That is, what you find on reflection is inner. I mean, that's what, I talked last time, Augustine saw Jerome reading this book and getting inner meaning out of the book directly into his mind. You can do that. But Dasein isn't essentially reflection. Dasein is essentially absorbed in dealing and coping, whatever. So he says Dasein finds itself proximally in what it does. This is a crucial sentence. Dasein finds itself proximally in what it does, uses, expects, avoids, in those things environmentally ready to hand with which it is concerned. And I think that's important for 2 reasons. One, there are readers of Heidegger, and there was like a TA that I fought with over this for about the last 4 years. He's now gone on to be a big success as a business consultant. I don't know what that shows, except that you can do all sorts of things as a philosopher. But he kept saying, well, Heidegger doesn't believe in inner experiences at all. And I thought, no, I hope not. I mean, I don't think he should just rule out everything that people have made a great effort to find out, that you can cry inwardly like Odysseus and so forth. But I think that's a nice quote. I take it there are, quote, experiences, some private stuff. And they might even be sort of what you perform when you act consciously, reflectively. There may be you as a ego doing the acting. But all of that is not where you basically are. And what you're doing when you're doing your Daseining. Then you are absorbed in your dealing and coping and taking a stand through it. That's what it says. That Dasein finds itself proximally, that is, right off. Sometimes he says proximally, and for the most part. That means at first and normally, or most of the time. So Dasein finds itself at first and most of the time absorbed in what it's doing, in the environmental stuff. That's his answer to the idea that you need empathy. You don't need empathy to find out what somebody's doing. You just need to watch their comportment to find out what they're doing. And so you can just look at somebody and you can see what they're up to. A little more of that in the next paragraph. Skipping 3 lines. We have already intimated that this I here, which we can say, does not mean a certain privileged point, that an I thing, but is to be understood as being in terms of the yonder, of the world that is ready to hand, the yonder which is the dwelling place of Dasein's concern. So these are very many ways of saying that over and over, Dasein is what it does. Oddly enough, I thought I wrote in here, maybe you'll come across it later, one more interesting place where he says that. Well, he says it clear enough there, so I'm not going to go look for it. So there, if that's true, the problem of other minds just disappears. But, and now comes one more move that I think doesn't, Tyler.
If he knows religious motives to perfection, if he knows that is problem of other minds, but there's limiting problems.
Uh, I suppose. I mean, we get to this very tricky question that Wittgenstein is so concerned with, because pain is a very interesting one. Could I be feeling pain and not acting in any way as if I'm in pain? Then how do you get access to the fact that I'm in pain? It's not a and so Wittgenstein goes out of his way to try to say that pain is necessarily connected with pain behavior, and then you see people and you see whether they're in pain. I don't think Heidegger has a view about that. I think Heidegger just wants to say whatever it is that you do have inner direct access to, it's not important as to about who you are. It may be very important if you're in pain, if you don't want to be in pain, and you got to try to get out of it somehow. But and of course, as soon as you start sort of scrambling around to get out of it, it's pretty obvious what your problem is. But the point is, who you are is not going to be understandable in terms of this residue. I think Tyler said something like that. This inner stuff, which you got to understand, is going to be sort of, in Heidegger language, privative. It's something that's left when you take away almost everything that's important to what it is to be Dasein. There's a little bit of private stuff there that you can get by introspection. That's why I told you the story about Odysseus and about Augustine and about after images and stuff. It's a hard thing to find much evidence for it, and when you compare it to the amazing amount of hammering and walking and looking and talking and stuff that we do in the public world, like our comportment, it looks tiny. But that's all right. So far, I think Heidegger's thinks that's fine. And I think Tyler's right, there's a problem about how you ever get to know it. And that's exactly what I was going to talk about next. Yeah, but before I do, questions, yeah. Yeah.
This was create an interpretation of the world, which they then sort of push objects and show off then how do we, just by looking at, let's say, a different interpretation of the world is doing, how can I know what their interpretation was?
Yeah. Okay. That's a good question. I don't know quite what to say in a short way. This is a serious problem. Heidegger's student Hans Georg Gadamer thought a lot about this problem. How coming out of one culture with its world and its style, you could understand another culture with its world. And he has this notion of the fusion of horizons, which he makes a lot about. Charles Taylor then takes up and makes a lot about. It's not easy. Anthropologists learn to do it. One thing you'd have to do is go native. You can't. This is the most sort of Heideggerian thing to say. It's not a belief system the other person's got, which if you could figure out and write down all the things they believe, you'd then understand their world. It's much more basic than that. It's ways of acting and seeing and standing and moving and so forth. But it's just a fact that you can learn it. As anthropologists, if you live with the people long enough, you can see the ghosts or that they see and so forth. But it's okay. I mean, on this view, it just means that it's not in a sort of philosophical, epistemological problem that this is utterly private to that culture and you got your private. The whole thing just gets scaled up. It's something that they're doing, and it's something that you could gradually learn to do. Okay. Yeah.
In reflection to this question, it seems like there's a real, you sort of know how that it seems like the translation.
There is. Oh, I see. I thought you were going to say the opposite, and I was already getting an answer to that question. Now, I thought you were going to say, yeah, but let me answer what you didn't say, because somebody might. Isn't it important that as we cope, we've got this inner sense of what's going on? But you were smart enough not to say that, because I spent a lot of trouble talking about people in flow, and Heidegger, I couldn't open to it, but there's a place in Division 2 where he says we have to lose ourselves in order to become able to deal and cope most successfully. So that's fine. But isn't there a skill in introspecting? I'm sure there is. But it's not a problem, I think, for him, because it's not what you find when you, it would only be a problem if what you found when you introspected with skill was your true self, which is a kind of romantic view, but it could also be a kind of psychoanalytical view. As soon as you think that, you need help, from a Heideggerian point of view anyway, to get over the idea that there is this deep true self that if you were subtle enough and smart enough and worked hard enough at it, you'd be able to learn about it. Okay, next. Yeah.
How do you make sense of
You're great. Terrific. You and who else? I guess Tyler maybe are doing the next move I wanted to make. I love it when you can see ahead like that. I mean, I was going to say, but there is, after all, some sort of problem of other minds. And if you're going to take this view that you're going to sort of get rid of the problem of other minds, you better explain sort of to what extent there is such a problem, or another way to put it is, why does anybody ever thought that such a problem existed? That's sort of what you're asking. Isn't there a sense in which people are alienated and withdrawn from each other and don't know what each other is thinking? Or am I reading stuff into your question?
what are we withdrawn? How do you make it for being withdrawn, not being withdrawn? That's going to be our being withdrawn.
Heidegger then talks about, wait a minute, let's get withdrawn sort of clear. When Heidegger talks about how the hammer must withdraw in order for me to hammer successfully, he means it's got to become what I call transparent or invisible. That's different. I thought you were going to talk about people who are sort of secretive and who you feel what they're doing and what they're thinking isn't really in sync, and that they're hiding from you their real motives and their real feelings. That would be the real problem of other minds, not as a general problem about how any human being ever understands the private stuff going on inside of any other human being. That's a fake problem. But that particular human beings can have particular problems with understanding some of the private, secret memories, motivations, and stuff of some other people. Heidegger, I think, doesn't want to deny it. In fact, I'll show you where he says it. And I think it's interesting because I think if you're going to go around dissolving philosophical problems, you'd better also make a space for whatever that philosophical problem was sort of trying to get at, and admit that there really is an issue there. It's just not the kind of problem, you see, that grows out of a philosophical assumption, namely that the self is self-contained private stream of experiences. That's hopeless, and that's Heidegger just wants to get rid of it. But now, let's turn to the part where, I don't know if it's going to help or not, but then you can say something again. I mean, where he talks literally about being withdrawn, that people can be withdrawn from each other, and then, and you see what that would be. You've got to see the picture. There's going to be a breakdown case in which you can see when the normal public interaction of people, what I like in Merleau-Ponty, but Heidegger can't say it, is intercorporeality. My body just picks up on your body lots of what our shared situation is without having it going through my mind or your mind at all. Merleau-Ponty says that, and now in neuroscience they're discovering something called mirror neurons, which sort of explain how we do it. But Heidegger doesn't go that way. Heidegger just says, well, mostly you're taking a stand on your being. You got to do that publicly. Everybody can see it. But sometimes there are breakdown cases, and this is on 161. On German 124, right at the top. Knowing is grounded in being with, which understands primordially. It operates proximally in accordance with the kind of being which is closest to us, being in the world, being with, and does so by acquaintance with that which Dasein, along with others, comes across in its environmental circumspection and concerns itself with, and so forth. So far, that's the thing we've been saying. And a little further, solicitous concern is understood in terms of what we are concerned with, and along with our understanding of it, and so forth. And along with concernful solicitude, the other is proximally disclosed. That's just a summing up. Now comes the breakdown case. That because solicitude dwells proximally and for the most part in the deficient or at least indifferent modes, indifferent or passing one another, proximally and for the most part. That's a funny thing to say. I can't defend him there. I mean, he's going to go on and say, boy, people are really awfully alienated from each other most of the time. That's sort of I think, a German 1920s existentialist kind of neurosis. But I think that he's right that any time, anywhere, somebody can be isolated from somebody else on a background of shared stuff that they're not isolated on. That's one way to see it. I mean, if they were totally isolated, we got names for that. They would be a schizophrenic having a schizophrenic breakdown in which they really were, as we say, out of touch with everybody in the world. But he's got this funny view, but let's go on. I never noticed it before. Because solicitude dwells proximally and for the most. Solicitude is his name for caring about people. Where does he define it? You should know. We should look at it. Have we defined it already? Yes. The bottom of 158. There's lots of different kind of solicitude, and even we got to go further. It's defined at the bottom of 157. So Dasein's, I'll just tell you this, mode of relating to things is care, and care comes in two flavors, modes. You can be caring about things, and that's concern. Care is Sorge in German. Concern is Besorgen. Or care can be caring about people. And then it's Fürsorge, and that gets translated solicitude. And then he has stuff to say about that. It doesn't have much to do with what we have to worry about here, so we are not talking about it. If anybody, I mean, these are possible paper topics lurking all over the place. Now, where was I just reading? Here we are, on 161. Okay, now, solicitude, that is the way we care about people, can go wrong, and he thinks it goes wrong most of the time. Heidegger was not a very socially adept person, and he didn't have much sense of ethics either, or how to treat other people. I mean, I think he's just telling you his own kind of problem. But anyway, here we go. But because solicitude dwells proximally and for the most part in the deficient, or at least the indifferent modes, in the indifference of passing one another by, the kind of knowing oneself which is essential and closest demands that one become acquainted with oneself. I think that isn't, maybe that's somebody else talking, the interlocutor. I wish it were. Let's go on. And when, indeed, one's knowing oneself gets lost in such ways of aloofness, hiding oneself away or putting on a disguise, being with one another must follow special routes of its own in order to come close to others and even to see through them and so forth. Well, gee, half understanding. I tell you what I was going to say, and then I'll try to see if I can say anything more. I'm just going to say there are privative modes in which people have hidden motives and so forth. They're hiding themselves. They're disguising themselves. They're withdrawing from their normal, everyday human relations. And then you've got a problem of specific other mind. You've got a problem of another mind, and you better try to figure out what they're up to, because it could be dangerous for them or dangerous for you. That's all fine. That's a deficient mode. That's sort of a breakdown case. It's like what happens when the hammer is missing. The normal activity doesn't work anymore, and you have to deliberate and think about what to do, and either look for a hammer or find another hammer or get a better theory of hammers and so forth. So there can be breakdown relations with people. Now, how to understand that first sentence? I'm going to go read it again. But because solicitude dwells proximally and for the most part, that means at first and most of the time in the deficient or indifferent modes. I can see the indifferent mode even. I mean, yeah, sure, most of the time we are sort of utterly not involved with or concerned with what stand. I'm not concerned or involved with what stand the people in BART are taking. All of those people in that subway car. I couldn't care less. I'm busy reading what I'm reading, and I got my own stand to take and do. So, and that would be all right. That if people are mostly related to each other in an indifferent mode, but it wouldn't be a problem yet. It would just be you didn't care, but you could find out if you did care. The problem is when people are actually trying to fool you, disguising their motives and so forth, you see. But now I want to say, but that's not your normal situation. So maybe we can sort it out. So I want to say approximately for the most part, you're in an indifferent mode, and therefore you are neither getting it or not getting it as to what the other person's stand on their being is. The kind of knowing oneself which is essential and closest demands that one become acquainted with oneself. What does that mean? Anybody know? I mean, you ought to be acquainted with how should you become acquainted with yourself? By doing something. I mean, I become acquainted with myself by teaching or going home and being a father or whatever. And everybody, you don't, I mean, in Heidegger world, you don't go around sort of having deep introspective studies of what your inner state really is. Is this infatuation or is this really love? Or is this jealousy and so forth? That's one way to be, but that's not Heidegger's view of normal Dasein. Okay, I don't know about that sentence, and I don't know what to make of it. Anyway, I know what he should say, and that's all we need. He should say that yes, there can be a kind of breakdown of normal being with, and its ability to get us in touch with Dasein, other Daseins, in a way that is connected with what they're up to, and that's Dasein with, and that's the basic mode. And sometimes it can break down. And of course you have to say, always with Heidegger, and you can understand the breakdown as deficient version of the basic mode, but you can't be a romantic starting with this introspection, finding out what your really deep feelings are and your really deep self is, and then go to the public world. He thinks you can't take sort of this inner residue and produce the whole shared public phenomenon, but you can take the public phenomena, leave out a lot, and then you'll understand what this inner residue is, namely inner residue. Now I saw a hand somewhere. Yeah. Would what? Indebtedness? Is that what you said? It's authentic. I mean, well, we didn't talk about authentic, inauthentic. That's a whole other story. That is, how can I tell you without, making you read Division 2 instantly on the spot? There is, you can see whether somebody's authentic or not in their behavior in Heidegger by the fact that authentic people respond to the unique situation, he'll say later. That is, they just don't do what any old person does in a banal sort of standard way, responding to what they take to be the standard situation. They respond in their own unique way to what they perceive as the unique situation, and that's another story. And then you can recognize them and what they're doing. At least the people who are good at that can recognize other people who are good at it. It's all, how many come across in 25a, phronesis in Aristotle? Heidegger gets this from long studies and many hours of lectures on phronesis, which is translated practical wisdom of what people have who are really authentic and who do the appropriate thing at the appropriate time in the appropriate way. And but we're going to put that aside. That's a Division 2 question. Yeah. We're talking about now this business of about, I just want to see where we are again. We're going to become acquainted with ourselves. Yeah. I couldn't hear you. So talk louder.
to make the acquaintance of other people, not only.
Where now? What sentence are we at? Because that would be great if that meant make the acquaintance of other people too. I've lost the sentence I'm trying to explain. Where are we? Oh yeah, okay, but because solitude, so forth. And now then he says, and closer demands that one become acquainted with oneself. What is now, and you say means what? Okay, so you would become acquainted with yourself. I like it. Here's how I'm going to get out of it until I get a chance to think more about it. How would you become acquainted with yourself? Well, you've got two pictures. You go and you close yourself off and you introspect and you meditate and you try to get an understanding of what you're really feeling and what you really want and all that. That's not what Heidegger thinks. Heidegger, by the way, was not happy with the whole idea of therapy, although he was in therapy at some point for a while. But the idea that you're going to find out about yourself that way, as opposed to finding out yourself by observing what you're doing, what you care about, what you're willing, how much of my time with my family I'm ready to give up because I got to talk to students and vice versa. You find out lots about yourself and your understanding what it is to be you. And I think that would be all right. That would be helpful. That you have to be acquainted with yourself, just like you have to be acquainted with your neighbors. And it's not by introspection, but by watching what you're doing, so to speak. That would be nice. Is that what you're saying?
Oneself isn't even named, just as that one become acquainted. Does that make sense?
But then I don't understand what that. It's got to have some. You got to be acquainted with something. So anyway, I'm making. Well, that's interesting. Okay, well that's good. That's nice that it's not in there. Hard to know what to do about it. But okay, not. Is it at the bottom of the page? I haven't had time to go down and look. Too. I see. Wait. Okay, let me just look at it. One is to be distinct from the self, therefore, knowledge of the self, which will be discussed. I will go back and look at all that. Well, yeah. With what? I see. Okay. Well, I think this was a happy detour because it's important always to know sort of what the enemy view is, and it's better not be this deep kind of introspection. I can't resist telling you a story that illustrates this. I was having lunch at the faculty club with Charles Taylor and with Michel Foucault. And they couldn't be more different, although they're very smart people. And Charles Taylor, who's always interested in introspection and articulating your deepest desires, was talking about how important it was to articulate and think about whether when you were involved with some person, it was infatuation or was it really love. And Foucault got more and more worried and puzzled and that, and he finally said, what difference does it make as long as you're enjoying yourself? And, those are the 2 points of view, really. And Heidegger, I think, is on the enjoying yourself side of it. You'll find out soon enough, and you can't find out anywhere by a short circuit of self-contemplation anyway. Yeah. Is uniquely mine. Oh, well. What I make of it had nothing to do with introspection. It's got to do with your style. That's funny that you should. How many have seen Across the Universe by any chance? It's around. It has a very Heideggerian moment in them. I was thinking that I was going to begin the lecture with this, and then I decided not enough people will have seen it. But let me state it first in Heideggerian. I got into long arguments with my TAs over the years about when you're behaving authentically. You've got this mindness. It isn't enough, they were telling me, to say being a teacher. Being a teacher is it's a role, it's too general, lots of people are teachers. That can't be my stand on my being. My stand on my being, my other TA, I had these 2 TAs, Rick Canedo and Forrest Hartman. Rick was saying, you're too general, and Forrest was saying the right answer is that I take a stand on what it is to be me. And Hubert Dreyfus, and there's nothing more general you can say. You have your own unique just being you. And then, after much struggle, I finally came to the view, I think it's that I'm a teacher in my own unique way. But it has a mixture. You have to have the role of teacher. You can't just go and be unique. And I could just be rolling around on the ground or outside or something and be very unique. And you've got to do it, but you can't just I can't just be Bert Dreyfus, and I can't just be a teacher. It came up when you see Across the Universe, which is a pretty good movie. There's a place at a dinner, they're having a strange discussion, and the father says to the son, why don't you do something? Why don't you get a job? Why don't you go to work or whatever? Do something. And somebody else, and the son says, you've got to be something in order to do something. And then the Heideggerian says, how does he say it? You've got to do something. I'll tell you next time. I can't remember exactly the phrase, but the phrase was, in effect, you've got to be able to do the thing in your own way, and he was putting the two together, and that stopped the conversation at the dinner, I remember. But luckily I was with 5 other people. Somebody will be able to remember. Okay, we got to go on. We're ready to go to the other half of the lecture. I just want to see one more sentence, which I think is important, maybe not. Well, I'll just sum up the thing. Empathy comes back in, because Heidegger says, yeah, there's empathy, but it's only in these breakdown cases. At the bottom of 162, German 125, he says, empathy does not first constitute being with. Only in the basis of being with does empathy become possible. It gets its motivation from the unsociability of the dominant modes of being with. That last thing is a bit that too bad way of thinking, but he's saying, in effect, this general point: empathy is what you do when there's a breakdown. It gets its necessity that you need to do it, and it gets because there can be breakdowns, and then you have to. But still, you have to rely on a kind of being with, even to have empathy. That's his conclusion. Okay, that was all fascinating, but we got to run on. Now, from now on, we're finally ready to take up the tantalizing question that I left you with last time. So, and it's the final nail in the coffin for the ego and for the subject, I think. And it's very original Heidegger. And the question I was asking is, well, what's the source of the meaning in Descartes? It's us putting values on things. In Searle, it's still us putting values on function predicates on things. In Kant, it's the transcendental ego giving meaning to everything. In Husserl, it's the individual transcendental ego that gives meaning to everything. Heidegger's got an entirely different take on where the intelligibility of everything comes from. And having read it now, does anybody think they know the answer to that puzzle question? It's very surprising and radical. Well, we have to find out. Okay, so here we go. We're going to talk about now, at the bottom of 163, section 27, every day being oneself and the one. Cross out the they. The first thing we have to do is fix the translation. It's one of those moments where the translation goes directly against the phenomenon. The das Man, the German, das is just the, and Man is, now I have to tell you, it's not man. It means, in English, that's why I translate it the way I do in my commentary. It has to be translated the one. Some people say the anyone. I think Pohl does. He got that from me at an earlier stage. I believe that we should say the anyone. I don't think that's good enough. Some people say the one with a capital O. That's a bad move because in German it's got a capital M, but again, all nouns have capital M's. That sounds like some godlike thing. So what is das Mann? What does it mean to say the one? Well, it comes in German and in English when we say one pays their income tax, or one eats their peas with a fork, or whatever. It's the general statement of how one behaves. I can't even say it without it in there, in the culture. So one sits on chairs, and one generally doesn't stand on chairs. It's the norms. The one is the phrase that expresses what the norms are. Now, and the important thing is, it isn't just that they eat their peas with a fork, or they pay their income tax. It's got to cover me too. That's the crucial thing. I'm part of the one. The whole point of this chapter is that I am the one. The chapter starts by asking, who is Dasein? You can ask yourself two questions as you read it. It's answering both at once, and in a completely original way that no other philosopher I know of has even gone into. This is an amazing chapter because it's clear, it's straightforward. The phenomena is right there, as Heidegger says in the History of Concept of Time, in your face, and yet nobody has noticed it because it's very, quote, sly, Heidegger says. And once you see it, you see that, of course, it's extremely interesting and important. So the question you want to ask yourself is sort of what the caterpillar asked Alice in Wonderland, who are you? You want to ask yourself, who am I? That is the who of Dasein. It sounds, and you might think, well, who am I? Well, I'm Hubert Dreyfus. I've got my own style and my own family and all that. Heidegger says, no, that's not who you are, unless you're authentic. But we're talking about normal people now and who they are. So you want to know the who of Dasein, and you want to know the source of all the intelligibility in the world. Heidegger's going to answer both of them by saying it's the one. Now, how am I going to convince you of that? Well, it'll take a while. But first, let's just fix the translation. Whenever you see the they, you got to say the one. And even the translators on 164 have to contradict themselves. When he talks about in the first full paragraph on 164, about the middle of 126, I'm trying to skip into the sentence somewhere. Being has my being or its being, I'm in the first full paragraph, third line. Its being, that is Dasein's being, has been taken away by the others. Dasein's everyday possibilities of being are for the others to dispose of as they please. These others, moreover, that would be the they. So but this is Heidegger moving you into it. Those others, moreover, are not definite others. On the contrary, any other can represent them. And there you get sort of the anyone, but it's not right yet. What is decisive is just that inconspicuous domination by others, which has already been taken over unawares from Dasein as being with. One belongs to the others oneself and enhances their power. You can't say one belongs to the they oneself, because the whole point is it's not me and them. He gets clearer where it says 127 in the margin, when he wants to say that we are all taken over by this norm, this one. We take pleasure and enjoy ourselves. Now, if he says they, the translator, he notices that we shouldn't say they. He puts Mann in quotes. What we have to say, of course, is we take pleasure and enjoy ourselves as one takes pleasure. We read, see, and judge about literature and act as one sees and judges. Likewise, we shrink back from the great mass as one shrinks back, and we find shocking what one finds shocking. The one which is nothing definite, which we all are. See, we can't all be the they. Which we all are, though not as a sum, prescribes the kind of being of everydayness. So, what's it all about? Well, the phenomena is that all of our activity is permeated by norms, is done because it's the normal thing to do, that we've grown up and it's part of this familiarity that we've taken over, that we got these norms, and all over the place we are conforming to these norms. The phenomena, and this is the thing to keep in mind, the phenomena is the fact that, and the importance of the fact that we all conform to norms all the time, even though most of the time we don't even notice it or realize it, and so forth. Now, to understand this, you've got to have in mind the kind of norm he's talking about. If you just stay on the level of Das Man, you can make clever remarks and even maybe sort of social observations, but you can't understand what Heidegger's talking about, because he's talking about an invisible phenomenon, which is already sort of contradictory. Well, I'll give you an example, 2 examples of invisible phenomena that people have studied. When you this distance standings, I think I've talked about it already, haven't I ever? I mean, we all stand a certain distance from each other when we're with friends, with intimates, with strangers, and with authorities, and we do it under different conditions and so forth. We've got this whole understanding of what distance one stands under all sorts of conditions. And we got it in this sly way, namely, it took us over. And our parents taught it to us, but they didn't even know they had it. They just felt it got closer to us if we were too far away, and farther from us if we were too near, under a whole variety of circumstances. And our amazing ability to acquire skills without even knowing that we're acquiring them, we acquired this great, nuanced, subtle, complicated skill of standing the right distance, standing the distance that one stands in that sort of situation. But of course, this is all over the place. We eat the way one eats, and we walk the way one walks, and we sit the way one sits, and it just permeates our culture. The next question really is, and why is that important? Think to ask yourself, I was going to give you another example of what one does, which struck me the other day. I was reading some kind of linguist who listens carefully to what we say. I'll tell you something which will transform your way of listening to telephone conversations. For the rest of your life, you'll never be able to forget it. Maybe you realize it already. Probably not. That when you want to get somebody off the other end of a telephone conversation, you always say, okay. And after you've said okay 3 times, they go away. And it's just an amazing phenomenon. Just listen to yourself and everybody else. Where you got it, I don't know. We all got it. One says okay when one is finished with the conversation, and one realizes at the other end that one is finished with the conversation, and that's it. Sometimes people are stubborn, and you have to say okay 4 or 5 times to get them off the phone. But in any case, the world is just full of stuff like that. And why is it important? Well, what if people didn't? Well, no, I needed to say one more thing. What's the name for this phenomenon, besides this brilliant name, the one? Well, we're talking about conforming. You've got to conform to the norms of the culture. That's the boring way to put it. And you've got to, and why do you have to? Well, partly you have to because they force you to. If you deviate, they will either coerce you back into the norm, or they will co-opt you back, or they will all join you, and everybody will have long hair, like in Across the Universe, which is in the 60s. And then one had long hair, and then there was a time when one had short hair before that. Anyway, you will either everybody will start doing it if you do it and it's off on its own, or they will put you back into doing it. Another place where it's clear is in pronunciation. If you mispronounce somebody's name or just some word in English, people won't usually just tell you, they won't say you mispronounced it, you ought to say it so and so. They will use the word in the next sentence or so with a sort of emphasis on it. And you will pick up it, and you will start saying it right. And if you don't, they'll just have to do that a few more times. And they may not even realize they're doing it. But it's important. What would happen if we didn't all conform to talking the same way? Well, if it got serious, we couldn't even understand each other. I mean, I could hardly understand when I was in New England that Gloucester was was written Gloucester, and I didn't know where this place was. If everything was like that, and it is in English more than in any other language, that the words don't even sound like what they're written like, you'd be in terrible mess. But since everybody mispronounces Gloucester as Gloucester, or when you're over there in Massachusetts, it works fine. Or, here's another example. I'm just trying to tell you how conforming to norms is so crucial. Take eating. If in some cultures you eat with your hands in Morocco, and you eat with your chopsticks in Japan, and you eat with forks and knives here, and so forth, that's fine. But as long as one does that, one eats with chopsticks or one eats with one hand. But if people ate at whatever time they pleased, at whatever place they pleased, and used whatever equipment they pleased, there couldn't be any meals. You've got to cook the food so that you can either pick it up with chopsticks, or pick it up with your hands without getting burned, or pick it up with a fork. And people all have to roughly sit down at the same time, because if you want to eat the food hot, it's got to be cooked for that time, and so forth. There's you could go on and on about one does in order just to eat a meal with your friends. And if one didn't have that, one couldn't do it. So it turns out that the one has a huge amount of importance. I told the story in a different order than I wanted to, but since I got to this point, it turns out the real punchline is the middle of 167. We're going to go back over this next time, of course, because there's lots to be said about the difference between conforming and being a conformist and so forth that we need to talk about. But that there is the one, and that it does a big deal job is in the middle of 167. Heidegger sort of says it off in a hurry. Well, let's start at the top in italics. The one is an existentiale, and as a primordial phenomena, it belongs to Dasein's positive constitution. That is, I'm telling you this in this order because people misunderstand this chapter, because they think that conforming is a bad thing, like being a conformist is a bad thing. But there is a positive function of conforming. That's why I told you couldn't eat, you couldn't talk, you couldn't drive, couldn't do anything that you need to do without conforming. And then he says in the middle of 167, that the one itself articulates the referential context of significance. You see that at the middle of 167. That's just the generalization of what I said about talking and eating and driving and going to lectures and everything. The whole referential context of significance, all the in order tos, the toward whiches, the what fors, and even the ultimate for the sake of whiches, which has got to be a role like teaching, even though it's got to be a role like teaching like me, if it's going to do the job. But all the roles that enable Dasein to take a stand on its own being are things that one does in this culture, like be a teacher. I mean, one doesn't, in this culture, be a samurai, and I can't take that stand, even on being me. That's just not available to me. I can't, even though, and I certainly can't commit hara-kiri when if everything goes wrong, even though that's what one does in a different culture. So you can't be Dasein without there being the one. Now, the next question you might want to ask then is, where does it come from? How did we get it? And Heidegger's not very interested in that subject, but I know some of you are, and it'll come up in office hours if I don't bring it up now. It's pretty obvious where you got it, but we want to know that Heidegger knows that. How did you get it? Well, you got socialized into it by your parents, all of whom already were doing what one does, even though they didn't know that was what one does, and doing sometimes very importantly subtle things, and sometimes, well, no, I don't want to, I'm getting ahead of the story there. You don't know where I'm heading, and I don't want to head there yet. Let me just talk about socialization, 246. This guy translates it in 246 in the history of the concept of time. This guy translates it anyone. The averageness, he says at the top of 246, averageness, which is again, with doing what one normally does. We'll get back to that next time. Averageness is an existential determination of the any one. It is that around which everything turns for the any one, which is essentially an issue for it. The any one is almost like a Dasein with it because it's got something that's an issue for it too, namely that everybody keep conforming. You can think of it this way just for fun. You may have heard of this theory about the selfish gene, that the genes are just sort of using us to perpetuate themselves, and that the main point is that your genes, which are really not yours but somebody else's from way back, but these genes are being passed on, and we come and go, but those genes don't come and go. They're using us and so forth. Well, it's the same for the norms. We're just, if you think of it the way Heidegger's thinking of it, we're just sort of the vehicle for the norms. Our parents got them from their parents, and nobody ever knows what they've got, and it doesn't matter whether they die or not, or we die or not, the norms are going to go on pretty much, and all the norms care about, this is again, topic 246, is just perpetuating themselves. They're sort of coercing and co-opting and subtly leading everybody into doing the average normal thing is what the norms are up to. That's how they live. But I haven't read the line I want, and I have to stop as soon as I do. At the bottom of 246, still history of concept of time, the one line I know where Heidegger sort of says, well, I know it's socialization, that's not my interest, but he says the common world, which is there primarily, and into which every maturing Dasein first grows, as the public world governs every interpretation of the world and of Dasein. So he knows that there's this common world and that we, as a maturing Dasein, get socialized into it. That's really not a big deal, except that it's interesting that he says it. So, okay, we've gotten that far. Now, you read the chapter, you keep your eye on the phenomenon, and one more thing. He's very confused. I forgot to tell you that. He's very confused between conforming to the norms and being a conformist. Because there's something fine about conforming to the norms. If you don't, you're in serious trouble. And there's something wrong with being a conformist. And Heidegger is confused in the sense, if you keep your eyes open, that he can flip back and forth within a single paragraph between telling you how positive and important the norms are, which I was doing today, and how destructive and bad the norms are, which I'm going to do next time. Okay, we better stop.